Hey everybody, it's Paul Giroux, paulfgiroux.com, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how I set up my Sony A1 for sports photography. And if you have heard about the Sony A1, it is quite the camera. It is up to 30 frames per second. You have to do certain things to make it work that way. Otherwise it's 10 frames per second faster than the A9 II, which was 20 and was a revelation. Well, after shooting the A1 for the last 2 weeks, it's been amazing for sports, and I'll be showing some sports photos that I've made along the way and give you some tips and things that I've learned about it. Now, what I wanted to do is talk about this camera from the standpoint of sports, although I pretty much configure everything the same way for the most part because I figure life is kind of a sporting event, and if a camera is configured to photograph sports, it can easily photograph anything else, whether it's a wedding, just portraits, or other things. And I think that even though this is kind of a sports-centric setting for this camera, I think you'll be able to make it work for just about everything. So I'm going to be switching over to the HDMI on the A1 so that you can see some of the setup menus that I go through. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. So here we switch over to this. Now the star menu is up on the top like it has been since I think it was the A7S III when it came out with the new menu styling, which is also on the FX3. So anything since A7S III has this new menu, and it makes it very easy to maneuver. Not to say that the old one wasn't learnable, although I know a lot of folks who don't like that old menu, and I hope they like this one better. I think this one's very clean and very easy to work with. And it's nice now that all my cameras, A7S III, FX3, and the A1 rather, all have this newer updated menu structure. So my menu 1, and this is how you set them. Oops. You go to add item, and then you can place it wherever you want. But I have area, date, time because I do a lot of syncing of cameras, especially for weddings. Face, eye priority, and autofocus. So I want to tell it to stay on or off, and then the face, eye, subject, whether it's human, animal, or bird. Since those are things that I would change frequently, since we have a dog, I sometimes turn it to animal. My menu 2 is aspect ratio, priority set, and auto white balance. Now, if you do shoot auto white balance, which I do at times, especially when I'm shooting raw, not so much with Jpegs, but sometimes I will. But it's nice to have the priority set in auto white balance, and there's 3 different levels of setting. That this came out, I believe, with the A7R4, and it was a way to do standard, ambient, and then more of a white, basing it on a white color value. So theoretically they're different, and theoretically it's better, but sometimes one works better in one situation. So if you ever are using auto white balance and are having trouble getting it the way you want it to look, then just go that way. Aspect ratio is normally in 3:2, but sometimes I'll go 1:1, 3:4, or even 16:9. So 1:1 is the Instagram or the wanting to shoot like a Hasselblad, which could be really cool. And then 4:3 is great when you're trying to do like a cover for a magazine or an 8:10 format, if you know that you're going to go to that output. But 3:2 is where I normally leave it almost all the time. And then my menu 3 is format, and I put it in menu 3. This came out of watching a friend of mine, Matt Johnson's video, where he talked about why he puts his formatting on my menu 3 so he doesn't easily access it by accident. So you still have to be careful, because if you sit it there, you might, if you leave it on my menu 3, it could still come back and find it. So, but it's nice because then you do have to do a little bit of a dive to get to it. Now, image quality is Jpeg or HEIF, which is a high efficiency image format, either in 8-bit, which is 420, or 10-bit. I have not played with these modes. I'm still waiting for the jury to kind of be out on them, although I'm sure that they're fine, but it's having tricky kind of reading them sometimes. So JPEG is standard, it's an 8-bit, and for the work that I'm doing, it's fine. I would like to get HEIF rolling though, because even the 10-bit file is is smaller than the JPEG file, which is pretty cool. So these are the image quality settings. So I'm going to set it for what I'm doing today, which is just strictly sports. So I'll be doing JPEG, and then I will do extra fine since I'm only shooting JPEGs, and I'll go to 21 megapixels, which is the medium setting. And then I'll hit OK. Now this file format is, you can see the movie setting, it's for 8K, but you can change it. And there you go. All the different settings. I won't go over them. That's something for another video. Movie settings, Aps-C shooting as auto. High ISO noise reduction. I'm going to play with this, and I'm going to move it to low. I shot some things the other night at an event, and I was up around 12,800, 16,000, and I thought it was a little bit too softened on the JPEGs. Now, on the RAWs, it's not as much of a problem, so I'm going to take this down to low and just play with it, but you can also turn it off if you want to. The normal is the default, but I'm just going to go to low. Color space, I leave that at sRGB, because with RAW, you can set that destination on the output. All right, so let's get down to, oh, I want to get back to image quality. Oops. Pardon me while I navigate these. So let's go to RAW, and let's hit RAW. Oh, so this is new with this camera. You have compressed RAW, you have lossless compressed, and you have uncompressed. So that's the largest bucket of information. This is a new category, and it's a smaller format, and it would be great if you just wanted a little smaller file and you just wanted to keep all the data. Now, if you are shooting compressed files, compressed, you can get 30 frames per second with certain things, certain parameters. You have to have certain lenses, so the more modern, more current lenses work really well, like this 24-1.4 I've got on the camera will work, but the 35-2.8, the 55-1.8, the old 35-1.4, they will not do 30 frames a second. The G Masters do, a lot of the G lenses, the current G do as well. The new 35-1.4 G Master, the new 51.2 G Master should do it. The 400-2.8, which I use, does it. Now, since I'm shooting JPEGs, the RAW setting doesn't really matter for me now. But that's how you get to it, is you punch it again, and then you see your different levels. I'll leave it in compressed. I typically shoot RAW plus JPEG for weddings on dual slots, and I shoot compressed RAW, and I'm fine with it. I might try lossless compressed, but since these files are so big anyway, I'm trying to keep the file size down as much as possible. And with 50 megapixels, that adds quite a bit more. It's twice as big of a RAW file as an A9 II. All right, so we are going to go. Another aspect of getting your 30 frames per second frame rate is the way your priority is set here. So if you're using autofocus continuous, which is what I recommend for sports because then it tracks, then you want to set it to release. If you leave it in the default balance emphasis, it won't give you that 30 frames a second. So autofocus single, it really doesn't matter because I'm not shooting sports in that mode, but in this mode, autofocus continuous, you want to set that to release. The other factor that you have to consider is what focus mode, focus area are you in. Now the tracking modes, I understand, will slow it down. So if you're using this tracking mode, tracking spot manual, which is the one I do, it may slow down your speed because it's just making some calculations that will impact the speed. If you want the fastest frame rate, you want to go to zone focus or wide area. Now, I'm willing to let it be a little slower if possible because I prefer using the tracking. And this is a new thing for me to use using tracking spot medium size. You can also go to large or small. In the past, I've used this one, which is tracking expandable spot. So it's kind of doing a few more calculations to stick and find somebody. So I'm trying this out to see if it's a little faster by going to the medium, and it seems to be a little bit faster, a little bit easier to maneuver. It's what my friend and fellow Sony artisan Pat Murphy-Racy does. He uses medium and he uses small in this tracking mode. So that's one of the ways that I've kind of changed my style somewhat, but it still works quite well, as we'll see coming up. And remember I said I shoot JPEGs today? Well, what I'm shooting now is JPEGs, and I typically dial in a color setting. So, for example, this was the other day, and I was at 6,700 degrees Kelvin, and then I also dialed in a M1 or a magenta 1 correction. Now, I have read some things online that some people think that the Sony files are green, and I find that this really kind of pulls a little bit of that out of the skin tones and the whites, and it might be something that you could try as well if you are finding that. If you're shooting a raw file, it may not merit the change for you, but if you're doing JPEGs, you might want to be able to do that. It's nice how you can be able to tweak the colors and refine them based on, it's not just dialing in a degrees Kelvin, you can actually do other things as well. So that's one of the cool things about this camera setting. All right, let's go back to menu. So we talked about focus modes and we talked about the priority setting. I'm going to go through these. The ones that I'm just clicking through, please know that I'm just clicking them because they're not things that I want to talk about when it comes to viewing sports. It's not really a menu march per se, but it's more of about a way to talk about how to configure just really for sports. Okay, so the custom key settings are an area that you're going to want to go into quite a bit. So this camera, given that it's a stills photocentric, the defaults are the custom key settings for stills shooting. And so on the rear wheel, I changed that to ISO for stills and video. That's the default auto exposure lock hold, which really doesn't matter for me since I so rarely shoot auto exposure. AF on though is something for people who shoot with the back button. That's the default is on. And there's one other setting that you're going to have to change in the menu, and I'll get to that in a moment, that will allow you to just have strictly back button focus. Now I used to be strictly back button, but since the Sonys have come out and since the A9 and the A9 II, I've gone away from that and just strictly use the shutter speed. But other people use the back button and that's fine too. The default for the video is the red button just right to the right of the eyepiece. Shutter type tells you if you've got mechanical, electronic, or auto settings. If you're using flash, in the past you could only use it in mechanical, but with this camera you can use it in both. And then to get the high frame rates and the silent shooting, you're going to want to be in electronic. So that's how I keep that the default setting. Touch Operation Select allows you to turn off and on the back screen so that if you're sometimes you can get your focus points moved by just inadvertently brushing up against it. So that's one of the things to consider. Focus standard is the joystick. The push in is to recenter it. APS-C S35 full frame is something that I've changed to that center button on the wheel. So it allows me to do an instant crop. Number 3 is not set. Number 4 is ISO. It's written on the side, so I keep that. Number 5, the down button, is not set. Now these are very personal to the way that you like to configure your camera. I prefer having the front be shutter and the back, number 2, be aperture. But you can switch them around based on your choice. Number 3, I change, it's the C1 button, I make that movie shooting. Because I like that in the FX3 and I like it in the A7S III, so this makes everything have a button there in that upper right corner by the shutter. And then switch to silent mode is nice because sometimes you want to hear the shutter just to confirm. Sometimes it helps in a portrait situation because then people realize that you're actually photographing them instead of shooting a movie. But when I'm shooting stills and I want to be super quiet, I can switch that off very easily with the C2 button. Oops, one more thing. And the last one is focus hold, which is the default. Not every lens has that. The old 55-1.8, 35-2.8 do not have the focus hold button, but the 35-1.8 has it. The 35-1.4 G Master has it, as well as the Sony 24-1.4, which I have right here. It has the focus hold button on the side. See that right there, right by that shiny G. That's really handy to have when you're using video, at least I find, for that with focus hold. With other still shooting, I typically don't use it. You might change it for something that you would prefer. Maybe you would use it for APS-C Super 35 crop on the lens for 35mm or for shooting stills, but for video you may want to have it be focus hold. So that's the beauty of this configuration, is that you can change it based on what your style is. And so this is custom key settings for movie mode. And as you can see, that's the only one that's been changed. Well, that's the default. Everything else follows what the modes are for the other ones. And this is custom key settings for review. And number 2, I've changed that, the C3 button, to do ratings. And what I wanted to do is rating for 5-star. So I've unchecked the other ones because when you first get into this menu, they're all checked. So I go to strictly 5-star, then enter that, and then F3 is the default for sending. And then let's go to here, and those are just the same as before. I do set record with shutter for movies on, and I like that because now I have 3 buttons on the A1, the A7S III to start. And with the FX3 I can set, I've got 3 buttons. It has different button settings, but I like having 3 options, and I like being able to start a movie with the shutter as well. So it just gives me a little bit more flexibility. This is the default is aperture value, time value, and I just switch it to the time value, aperture value, front and back. Okay. This is power save start time. I set it for 30 minutes. The default is for, I believe, 1 minute. And this camera does, to let you know, it uses more batteries power than the A9 II. It's much more of a voracious battery consumer. So you may want to set it to 5 minutes. But for an event, I am happy to change batteries if I need to. And it's one of the reasons why I have the grip at the bottom, because that gives me the ability to put 2 batteries in there. So, and then auto power off, I set that to high, which is more for video, but I've never run into it. But it allows you to run hotter and not. So here's what it'll say. The temperature of the device may rise to prioritize recording time. Would you like to change it? And I say yes. And that is something that was added after the 6300, because that was the first little APS-C camera that had 4K, and it tended to get a little hot. So until they upgraded the firmware with this feature, it sometimes would shut down. So this helps avoid that. I've never had a shutdown in the A7S III or the A9 doing video, and the A1 I have not either, but I haven't really pushed it through the paces yet. It will happen. Okay. All right. Let me see if I missed anything. Oh yeah, I did. I wanted to show you this. Oh, here it is, setup option. I missed it. Anti-dust function. This is a nice feature that came out with the A9 II, and it allows you to it closes the shutter when the power is off. The default is off, but I change it to on. And you got to be careful that you don't put your finger into the lens opening or hit it with a lens, the rear element, because you don't want to mess up your shutter. But what I love how it helps keep the dust off of the sensor, because when you turn the camera off to change a lens, you wait about 5 seconds and then you hear this little click. That lets you know that the shutter has closed, and then you can take it off, and then the shutter is down, so it will keep dust out, which is really, really handy. I love that feature of it. So, okay, so I wanted to go to Photo Mechanic to show you some images from a recent game. It was this week. It was on Tuesday. And let me find it. There it is. Okay. Okay, there they popping up. This is Lake Mills' star pitcher Taylor Rowan, who is probably going to be an all-state player, maybe even the best in the state. She's got an incredible fastball and technique, and she's going to be playing college ball. And she's also a really great young lady. And this is a sequence of her shot with the A1 at the highest rate, as high as I could go. Now, I was on tracking, so it may not quite be 30 frames a second, but it's pushing beyond 20, which is great. 400-2.8 A1 shot through a fence on a monopod. So this is almost like a movie. I'm just using the right arrow. So my computer's about ready to take off. Sorry for the noise. This shows an outfielder. So you notice there's a little bit of a haze from this. This is the Jpeg straight out of camera. It has not had any adjustment other than how it was shot. Were I to finish it for publication, were I going to put something on my website, or if I were going to be putting it on social, I would go in and give it a little bit more contrast and just make it a little bit snappier. But that's what shooting through a fence does. Notice the difference. I'm out on the first base line, and this is a Lodi outfielder just reaching for the ball and just misses it and follows the process. That is all on medium tracking. So this is another outfielder coming in for a catch. She made a great play. But notice, that's all you got is one shot with the ball. That's it. She made the catch. Then I regroup. And then she throws. And gets a force out. And I just missed the ball going in there, but you can see it in the webbing. Okay, so the secondary picture coming in. This is from behind the backstop. Again, I wanted to protect, you know, it'd be great to be on there, but it's not safe. And so you have to realize that this is kind of the compromise you make. So it is, again, a little bit flat, but I love the angle, love the action, and you really get to see the whole mechanics of the pitch. And going to another outfield play, again, notice the color saturation picked up the contrast because I'm not shooting it to a fence. But following her, it is following her, tracking her. Notice it stayed on her the whole time. It's just like watching a movie in a way. That's the frame. But I like having the option to showcase it as an event that's happening, the full play. I think for pitchers it could help in terms of their skills watching their delivery. But I just like that I have more cracks at the brass ring to make a photo with the higher level of frames. But it's not just that. It's the precision of the autofocus that makes all the difference. So yeah, the frame rate is awesome to have. But when you're talking about almost 30 frames a second or 30 frames a second, you need that focus precision that doesn't jump around from front to back, that stickiness of the A1's focus. But also, you're looking at a camera that's got an incredible processor that can take the file information and not have Jpeg, or I'm sorry, rolling shutter artifacts, because in cameras that don't have as sophisticated as a processor, you can shoot high frame rate, but you have to be very careful about movement. So it makes it very difficult to shoot fast-moving things like sports. Notice that the ball has not been distorted in any way. This is almost 30 frames a second, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so in this final sequence that I wanted to show, it's shot again from the end of the first base line, just at the edge of the fence. And so it's a 400-8 not cropped into Aps-C. Marissa is laying down a perfect bunt, and she gets out of the batter's box. So I've got the sequence on her, and it's tracking. Then I switch as she gets closer, and she makes it to first. She gets on safely, and then she begins to trip, unfortunately. But she had almost a Pete Rose style slide, and this is all just moving, and the camera is doing the tracking at that very high frame rate, which is pretty incredible. And then recovery, and then seated. So you get the full sequence of the event. So that's pretty much how the A1 and the 400-8 have been performing for me. Let me just clear this screen. It has been a real revelation to be able to shoot at this high frame rate. 20 frames per second was pretty amazing. And then to have an extra 10, or possibly close to 10, is even more amazing. And the quality of the images, the color out of the camera, as you can see, those are JPEGs straight out of the camera. They are superb and need very little post. And also, there's something about the Sony Jpegs that they do retain. I don't know how, but their highlight detail retention is amazing. And the shadow information is quite good because I think it's the broad range of the sensors, and I'm not sure what else that they're doing in the processing. But these files, even as JPEGs, are really, really good. So that's pretty much it for my settings for the A1. I hope you found this video helpful. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will try to get to them as soon as possible. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.